Hi, everyone. I'm just going to do a quick mic check to make sure you can hear us. If folks can just type the message in the chat box and let us know if you are hearing us, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, St. Albans.
Yay, St. Albans. All right, we've got lots of other folks coming on. So again, I'm going to write this in the chat, but hopefully you can hear us. If you're having any problems, please type in the chat box. All right. Okay. I don't know what it's doing in your location, but we just had a snow squall in Barrie, so super exciting, everybody.
Total whiteout. This morning.
Yeah.
About 15 minutes of complete total whiteout. And you may be able to hear that there are and will continue to be 3 of us on this call. Hopefully you can distinguish our voices a little bit, but we'll also try to introduce ourselves as we talk and as we take over different parts of this webinar. So,
and definitely make sure if for some reason you aren't hearing one of us when we're talking, give us a quick chat. We'll try to talk louder and or slower. Hi to Mary and Eva and Sheldon in Middlebury. Glad to have you guys on today. Anyone who doesn't know, we do have a Sheldon artifact in our new exhibit in the museum. The Sheldon relic chair is now on view as part of an exhibit in our local history gallery. So come on and see that. All right, I think we'll wait just one more minute, see if we get a few other folks who signed up on with us and get started. Again, if you did not notice, there is a chat box, should be sort of in the right-hand corner. That's the way to communicate while we're doing the webinar. So feel free at any point in time to put in a question or let us know, if you can't hear us, if you have a comment that you'd like to share with the group, please feel free to use the chat box. Couple of other things, we'll introduce ourselves in a second, but this webinar we're actually going to be doing some live video on. So hopefully that will work well, but we'll see how it goes in there. So that will be a fun little part of this webinar. It's a little bit different from what we usually do. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we'll see. Hopefully, if we get some of the other folks to join us now, they will come. But for those of you who do not know us all, we do have 3 of us here today. My name is Eileen Corcoran. I'm Community Outreach and Media Coordinator here at the Vermont Historical Society.
I'm Teresa Green. I'm the Collections Manager.
And Amanda Gustin, the Public Program Manager at VHS.
And so you'll hear the 3 of us sort of in between and everywhere today as we go along. So we just started with our introductions. We'll talk a little bit briefly about local history programs at VHS and then the Vision 2020 project, which is where this webinar is coming out of. And then we'll get into the meat of doing condition assessments, how-tos, our live video examination, and sort of follow-ups on that. So I am going to talk about VHS resources for local historical societies and museums, and we just want to make sure everybody knows about what we are doing for and with local societies around the state right now. So a couple of things. We do have a bi-weekly local history e-news. That comes out every other Thursday, so the next one's actually coming out tomorrow. And it's great. We like to sort of put information that we think would be applicable to local historical societies and museums in there. And then we also actually list your events and programs. And so that's a great piece of information to know what's going on in the state and also to spread the word about your events. So if you're not signed up for that, you can go to our website, vermonthistory.org, and sign up. We also do technical assistance and advice, and you can definitely contact me. And I'm happy to by email or phone to talk through questions you have, information you're looking for, or resources that might help. And then workshops and training. So we will be doing, after this webinar is one of our sort of training. We do have one more webinar after this. We'll also be doing a spring workshop, probably late April, early May, and details on that will be coming very shortly. And then we also have ways of sharing local societies and information. We have an online directory of local societies and museums, again, on our website. So feel free to take a look at that and make sure if you're a local society and museum in Vermont and are not on there, to let me know, and we're happy to have you there and make sure if you are on there that your information is correct. And we do also have a couple of other sort of ways in which we sort of have resources to share history. One is our traveling exhibit program, which is panel exhibits that we produce that are available to travel and rent around the state to help you make an exhibit yourself. And then our pub trivia program, which is a Vermont history trivia program that we package in different ways and put together. We had a really successful one that we did in Barrie this Saturday. And then I know the Manchester Community Library and Historical Society did one last week that was very successful. So that's been a great program. So if you're looking for a good way to do your own trivia program, it's a fundraiser or a fun community event, I highly recommend that. And again, our website, vermonthistory.org/local-history, is a great place to look at everything that we're doing for that. And I'm going to pass it over to Amanda to talk about Technology 2020 and the Vision 2020 project.
Great, thanks, Eileen. So to reiterate and reintroduce Amanda, the Public Program Manager here at the Vermont Historical Society. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of bigger picture of why we're doing both this specific exhibition as well as this webinar. So the Vermont Curators Forum, Vermont Curators Group is a group of people from around the state that represent museums, art museums, history museums, science museums, children's museums, as well as galleries, arts organizations, basically largely cultural heritage programs. And you can check out the website there. It's right up there, vermontcuratorsgroup.com. And they started off doing a lot of networking and a lot of sort of creating bridges and conversations between Vermont cultural institutions. And about a year and a half ago, started talking about what would it look like to do an annual, a whole year of linked exhibitions and programming based around a specific theme or title. And so now we are in that year that they proposed, 2020, and the theme is 2020 Vision, Seeing the World Through Technology. What does that mean? Pretty much a little bit of everything. Really, it's being very widely interpreted. It's being, new artistic media, old technology, vision kind of oriented things. It's a good theme because it's so wide that you can interpret a lot of different things within it. So you can make your collection work for it. You are still welcome to sort of produce a small exhibition in partnership with this larger one. You can check out that vermontcuratorsgroup.com for how to get involved. But the specific thing that we're going to be talking about today is what the Vermont Historical Society is doing as part of this statewide project and how you can hopefully get involved. So we are crowdsourcing our exhibits. The photograph that you can see in this slide is of our local history gallery at the Vermont History Museum. It's right in the center of our core exhibit, Freedom and Unity. It sees about 10,000 people a year, including just about every fourth grader in the state of Vermont. And what we have typically done, and Eileen touched on this briefly, is we've had 6-month rotations of exhibitions from local historical societies. We have a piece from the Sheldon Museum in there right now. as well as an exhibit from the Vermont Folk Life Center. And we thought we might provide an exhibit that's an access point for those of you who don't feel like maybe I can't do an entire exhibition, but I have a super cool object or grouping of objects related to technology or innovation in my collection that I think I'd like to show off, that I'd like to share as part of the narrative of technology and innovation history in Vermont. So we are crowdsourcing it. Basically what that means, look at that picture. On the walls, we'll be placing big panel sort of overview stuff to provide context and background on the history of Vermont technology and innovation. And then in the center and in the cases and things like that, we are hoping to fill full of objects from you and your local organization. So it's going to open in August 2020 and carry through January 2021. Check out vermonthistory.org and look for the local society page. What we're asking you to do is submit an application with your object or grouping of objects. That makes it sound formal, but basically we want you to pitch us an idea. I've got this really cool thing. Here's its story. I think it should be part of your exhibit. And we'll work with you to try and get it in there. So that's why we're talking through this webinar today and this whole series of webinars to get ready for this exhibit, to seek out those of you who may be interested in exhibiting as part of it. And so just as a heads up, we know that there's some problems with the sound, and Eileen is tech support tackling it right now. We're waiting to see if we can do some of that fix. But if anyone else is having sound problems, please give us a heads up in the chat. We will keep working on that. So check out the website, check out the application. Applications are closing soon at the end of March.
Into February.
So coming up really fast. And we want to hear from you, and we want to show your collections off and show your institution off. So the last thing I need you to know is the third in a series of 4 webinars. The last one, March 18th, 2020, will be how to write an exhibit label. So if you're not signed up for that one already, please do. And then you can see vermonthistory.org/LHS-tech-2020 is the spot to go to find the application, to find additional information, and to sign up for that webinar. All right, last thing that's it for me. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Eileen.
Great. So we're gonna start to get into condition assessments themselves. And again, I just want to double check. Looks like Natalie's having a difficult time hearing us. But hopefully other people still can, and we'll see if we might be able to somehow get her going as well. So again, just let us know if there's any tech issues as we go along. So what is a condition assessment? Why do we do it? When do we do them? So the basics of a condition assessment is basically telling you about the condition of an object at a specific time. And you're going to look at a specific piece and looking at its stability, damage, inherent problems, etc. And we'll go over some of this, especially as we do the live examination. But again, it's really just sort of getting a moment in time for an object and figuring out what is going on with it. And the reasons to do so, they'll be different for depending on what you're looking to use the object for or when it's coming in. So it's basically a condition assessment is always a good way of establishing a baseline. And this is especially true if you have a new object coming in, but it can also be if at a certain point in time you want to document the condition of all of your objects and get a baseline assessment on that so that you can then see over time how those may or may not be changing. It helps to determine if items need conservation or not. If you're looking to exhibit or loan an object out, is it actually stable enough to be loaned or on exhibit? Does it need conservation or care in order to be able to go on exhibit or loan? And then actually also is a way for determining if you need to quarantine new accessions. This is especially true for any items that might come in that may be susceptible to pests, mold, and other environmental concerns. And I'm going to turn over when to do condition assessments to Teresa.
Hi. So basically, you do a condition assessment every time you see an object. When you first get an object, obviously that's when you do the initial condition report, and you look at it, you find all of the problems with it, and establish really a baseline. You also need to do incoming objects when they come back from loans to see if they took any damage when they were out of your care, and when they come back from exhibition. And specifically on exhibition, what you're looking for is fading and light damage that wouldn't otherwise happen in storage, and damage from mounting. You also want to look at outgoing objects, so whenever anything goes out on a loan or out on exhibit, and that way you have a comparison for when it comes back. And ongoing, so if you're doing an inventory, which is shelf counting for objects, you want to confirm that it still is exactly the same as the last condition report. If it's not, you do another one. After you damage it, so if somebody drops something, you want to record exactly what damage came from that incident and what the incident was. And then before and after conservation. And that's specifically important because conservation can sometimes restore an object to something that you've not seen before, and you want to be able to record what parts of the object are new.
All right, and so now we're going to get into a little bit of the how-tos. So the first thing we're going to talk about are condition report forms. And this is just a standard form that you can create and use for entering your data. And this is good to have, basically so that you're getting the same information in the same place for everything that you're doing. We do, it is a good idea if you do use a database or catalog system like Past Perfect. And so what you can kind of see here, it's a little bit difficult to read on the screen, is the detailed condition report from Past Perfect. And the nice thing about aligning your forms with a database or catalog is that then you can use the same fields that you're going to be using in your database and just transfer the information directly there, rather than trying to get new information and put it into fields that may be different. And so, it may be good to have a sort of standard condition report form for anytime you want to do a baseline condition report, but you may also have special forms or supplemental forms you may want to use for loans and exhibitions. And we'll be sharing sort of a general, again, this one's from Past Perfect. I do have a general condition report form that we'll share afterwards for anyone who's looking for a form that doesn't have one. There are actually digital options and apps available for condition reporting. These are sort of useful if you're on the go, if you're in storage, if you're doing a lot. I will say they tend to be aimed more towards conservators and fine arts professionals, but it's something if you're interested in digital options to check out. We have two here. One is called Articheck, and the other is Art Reports. If you're a tech savvy, another way that you can use sort of digital options in a sort of more standard way is actually by using something like an iPad or camera and using the markup or notations fields and apps so that you can draw on photographs that you're taking of objects to note damages or to create a numbering system when you're talking through, when you're trying to describe damage and where it's located. Anything else, Teresa, you wanted to share on sort of supplies and how to start?
You want to, if you use cotton gloves, you don't use them for glass and ceramics because it makes it way too easy to drop them. Don't use them on books and paper because they're really susceptible to getting the edges taken off. But you do always have to use them on metal or gilded objects. If you're using nitrile gloves, the safest bet is just to always use them. There's not a slip risk. And that way you don't have to worry about holding ceramic that also has gilding.
Okay. So next we're going to talk a little bit about condition terms. And if you've done any sort of condition reporting or sort of looked at any of this sort of stuff before, you've seen probably these 4 basic condition terms. And these are terms that people tend to use sort of in the field fairly regularly. And so they're good ones to use to just establish a quick category for sort of easy reference. It's also helpful in establishing consistency in the terms. And this is especially true within your organization. So it's a great idea, or it might be sort of, sort of fun activity to do a group condition assessment. So you can sort of see, is everybody calling the same thing excellent, the same thing good, fair, and poor, and establishing what those 4 terms mean within your own collections to make sure that when somebody's looking at something or going back, that somebody didn't mark it excellent and somebody marked it fair, and why is that? And so that's sort of a fun thing to do, and we'll show you some examples of these terms. So right here on the left, we have an excellent item from our collection, which is a Vermont maiden doll from the 1991 bicentennial. She was given to us new in the package, so she is very excellent. So again, excellent should be like new or new, no visible damage, sort of just relatively pristine. The good object we have here is a sampler from the late 1700s, early 1800s. And this one is, it's a little difficult to see on the screen, but you can see there's a little bit of sort of loose weave in the linen, maybe a couple spots where there may or may not have been a little bit of pest damage, but it's in good solid shape. There's probably some fading going on there perhaps at time, but it's stable. So good, could have minor damage, expected wear for age, but it's stable and can be displayed, and is, it's generally, there's nothing that you need to be concerned about for a good object, hopefully. Next up, we have a fair object from our collection, and I will say these have been terms that were applied at some point by somebody in our organization. This is a Samuel Strong's hat. So again, probably late 1700s, early 1800s again. And you can see a little bit on here that there are some issues with it. If you notice in the bottom sort of right-hand corner, and the one little fringy thing is kind of hanging off to the side. There is also a few breaks definitively in what is, I believe, looks like it says it's potentially beaver hat. And so those are definitely some issues that if you were looking to display it or do something with it, that you might need to look at or deal with. Or again, that's something you're definitely going to want to take a look at over time and keep a good eye on as to whether there's anything active going on, or is this all damage that has happened previously. Anything else, Teresa, on sort of fair on this?
When I say that something's fair, by my definition, it's stable enough to be researched, transported, exhibited, but it can be anywhere from having a lot of period damage to having some modern damage, to where a dealer would not consider it museum quality. Mm-hmm. But museum quality by dealer standards is what we would consider excellent.
Mm-hmm. And then last is poor. And I don't think it sort of takes anyone to see sort of what the issues are with this object. It is a Civil War era flag, the 2nd Vermont Brigade. So you can see here, this has major loss on it. I think that sort of piece in the bottom of the tag, maybe one of the pieces from the top. I'm not 100% sure where that is, but that there's certainly a lot of loss here, a lot of damage. And this would be something that either would need a fair bit of conservation or certainly some stabilization, potentially for storage, but definitively if you wanted to try and do anything for display. This obviously, the poor objects, and Teresa, I think this is something you could talk to a little bit too. These are the kinds of objects that you definitely want to take into account as to whether they are something worth keeping in your collection. So this item is a poor object, but it has some extreme historic significance. So this would be something we wouldn't necessarily be deaccessioning, but it would definitely be a candidate for some potential, either again, stabilization or conservation. I don't know if you want to, Teresa, speak on that at all.
Yeah, so an object that is in poor condition, I have an additional definition where I call it destroyed or dire. An object that is in poor condition is actively hurting itself just by insisting and takes damage anytime it's touched. But it's something that if you did conservation or stabilization, in this case, it would be with mesh over it, kind of stabilizing it together so that as it continued to fall apart, the pieces didn't get lost. It's still valuable historically and worth preserving. Something that's dire or destroyed is something that is hurting itself just by existing, takes damage every time you touch it, and the time, money, and energy spent on conservation would not be worth it to preserve the object. Say it's a box that somebody found in an attic and it's not telling any story, and conserving it is not going to bring any part of a story back to us. That is an object that would be considered dire versus poor. If it's poor, you want to help it.
Yeah, and some of this, goes along with some of the things that we talked about in our previous webinar when we were talking about choosing objects to go on exhibit and how you prioritize objects for conservation care or use. And this is going to be something that could be part of your condition assessment, obviously, of sort of saying not only what the conditions are, but really putting these categories together. What do we need to look at for deaccessioning, or what do we need to look at for conservation, because it is still, again, historically significant, even if it's in poor condition.
And just to add from an interpretation or a strategic standpoint, every collection is going to have objects in every category.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even the Smithsonian, you cannot have every historic object in your collection in excellent condition. You should know which ones are in poor condition and keep an eye on them and sort of have that sense. But these are not like value judgments. They are useful terms to help you prioritize and help you make strategic decisions about your collection. And we'll talk about at the very end, possibly about interpretation, exhibition, and that kind of thing. So like if you're thinking about your collection, you're feeling like, oh no, you're in trouble. All you have now is additional information. We're not, like I said, not a value judgment necessarily, but useful markers.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to now be examining our piece, and that is going to include our live video demonstration. So Teresa's going to get ready, and then in a second, we're going to hopefully turn the video on and have that work properly.
We are depending on your feedback in this section, so if you have any trouble seeing, understanding anything that we're doing, please give us a heads up, because this is new territory for us.
So I've put on my nitrile gloves, and for note-taking, I'm using my iPad. I actually use GoodNotes 5 as my note-taking app because it indexes everything that you write, and I always lose my paper notes. So I brought a couple objects. We might not do all of them depending on time. Eileen's going to cut me off when my time is up. And I'm going to show you both general condition reports, which is most often what's going to happen in smaller institutions, and then I'll show you a really intense detailed report. So this object I have here, number 2000.3.4, and always want to record your number, is a little bric-a-brac souvenir. It's got the State House of Montpelier transfer printed onto it. It was actually made in Germany, commissioned for the Boston Bargain Store in Montpelier, Vermont. There's a very great mark there. This is an object that I would consider in good condition. The only problems with it are that it has some transferring of the luster from another object, likely when it was fired, so that would be considered period damage. And it has a small chip in the glaze at the bottom. And then there's some wear to the mark. So to record that, you would note the chip and then take a photo of it and keep that in the file so that you can then every other time you condition it, check that photo to make sure that it hasn't grown. Also going to want to record that as surface wear. And when there's damage to any kind of inscription, record the entire inscription and a photograph of it so that if it eventually wears away, you still have exactly what it looked like and what it said. So this is an object in good condition, and you would only have to mark down those few things. Next, I have an object that is in poor condition. And poor condition objects tend to have a longer condition report just because there's more to note. This is a hand-cut paper silhouette. Just on the outside, we have that there's some wear to the frame. And the back is loose and coming apart. If you wanted to catalog each piece separately, this back piece on its own is in good condition. Then the rest of it consists of a piece of silk velvet and the paper, and then some reverse painted glass. And the last two pieces are what make this object in poor condition. So on this, I'm not sure if it's going to come through. It's a little bit dusty, which would not necessarily contribute to your overall grade, but you would want to write that down. This dust can eventually eat through textiles. So this is our paper. The darkness there is from acidity, so you do want to record the color level of that if you have a color meter, which you can buy from Pantone. And it's got a rip here. So you want to measure that and take a photo of it, ideally with the measure in the photo, so you can check to make sure that it's not ripping more. And there's a small rip here, and there are some tack marks from when it was securely applied in there. And then finally, on our reverse painted glass, the paint is dry and flaking off the glass. And it is in the, when you're talking about an object, you use the objects left and right, and you can denote that with the word proper. So the proper left upper corner, proper bottom right corner significantly. Oh, can you not see it?
Or just reflecting with the light. It was kind of cool, actually. Woo!
And this is something because it's actively flaking off. I don't know if we can see our little flakes there. Every time this is handled, you'll want to take another photo of it just to make sure that it's not coming completely destroyed. If you notice that every time it's handled, it's taking a quarter of an inch off of the glass, then you'll have to make sure that it's never handled. So each one of those things is going to be a point within your condition report. And that would be an object. This would be an object that is considered in poor condition, because even though the acidity is eating it, it's not at a rate that is unsustainable for us. And it's not something that cannot be researched and exhibited. If every time you needed to research it, you had to take it out of the frame like this, then yeah, it might be in dire condition. And how are we on time?
We're good. We could probably do, if you want to do that. Another one. I will say, again, Teresa, I think, again, this piece especially talks through what might be called sort of the inherent vice of objects themselves.
For sure.
Quite a bit, with both the wood backing and the paper quality.
Yeah, the paper itself is acidic. The paint is obviously quite acidic, and then the wood itself is too. So if this was a very, very important object to your collection, not that this isn't to our collection, but if, what we will likely spend our resources doing is separating all of these pieces and isolating them from each other. And that could be anywhere from putting a line of tissue paper between all of them, perhaps even buffered tissue paper between them. And what buffered tissue paper does is it soaks up the acidity. You do eventually have to change those out. But at the very least, something that is acidic and in a frame, you want to take the backing off and open up the frame so that it can breathe, because it'll just get more and more acidic within itself. So this last one is a piece that contains so many details that it would be very impractical to do a detailed condition report unless you were doing conservation for it. So this is something that necessarily needs the more generalized report that you're going to do every time you handle an object. It's a sample book of lessons that girls were taught, needlework lessons. So it's got several different materials, which inherently means that they're going to try to eat each other. Starting off, the binding is still present at the top, but it is missing at the bottom. And then in each page, we have paper and ink, and in some of them, textiles that are stitched on, which is good because glue is definitely going to eat it. But if you were doing conservation to this object, you go through every page and write down the issues with all of them. So this one's got a crease. But in a generalized condition report for something as detailed as this, you'll want to record major problems, and then you kind of average everything else out. So having looked at this before, the only major problem with this is that the binding's missing. Everything else is in fairly good condition. There's some crumpling and creasing due to it being a book. So I would consider this in fair condition because it can still be handled, shipped out, and displayed.
Yeah, and again, I think that question mark about, again, why we're doing the assessment can change the way that we approach it and the amount of detail that we're doing. Again, if you're in an inventory or establishing general condition reports or condition assessments, again, you might be doing, again, a very basic look at it, just determining the very major issues with it, and, not trying to go through every little tiny detail.
Yeah. Yeah, and the most important thing for preserving an object is to handle it the fewest number of times possible. So if you work into your definitions that one of them means it can be displayed and researched and one of them means that it cannot, then every time somebody wants to use it, you don't have to get it out and handle it and examine it again. Mm-hmm. You can just look in your database. You don't even have to get up from your computer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say this is the great thing about the technology piece today, that even, again, if you're still using a paper form, it's still so easy to have photographs, again, photographs that you can even mark up or that you can take. So again, that you don't necessarily have to look at everything on the object itself every single time, but that you can use those reference photos, especially. You may want to do, some people still do drawings on their condition reports. So it's another great way to help people visualize where something is when you're talking about, as Teresa said, proper left or right, or, up or down or whatever. So that it's easy, especially with major issues, to be able to visually represent those in some way for the next person. I think that's one of the more important things.
Always approach it as if you know you're going to get hit by a bus on your way home from work.
There you go.
And people are going to have to know everything that you know.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that in condition reports, like in cataloging and many other sort of documentation things, that the perfect is going to be the enemy of the good. Mm-hmm. Like Teresa said, you could note every single crease and every single stray, everything in every object, but then you've done 3 objects and you still have 5,000 to go. So, also be a little strategic and be a little smart about the way that you're doing this. Make it a useful working document appropriate to the object itself. But also, having one really good condition report and 9 undone is not great either.
Okay, so hopefully I think the video went well. So thank you for hanging in there with us. And I will say, we don't have anything in our handouts yet, but we will put up an additional video that Teresa did before as well, with another item, sort of working on the condition report on that, just so you have another example. And so one of the things sort of to talk through that you heard a little bit with what Teresa was talking about is sort of how you describe damage. And the nice thing or the good thing, there are glossaries available for using specific terms related to what a damage is or why it is or what it is. So that, again, when you get hit by a bus, the next person that comes along knows when you're describing damage as something that's what it means. And so there's online glossaries available. There are a number of books that have great glossaries as well. Australia has a great actual visual glossary that they're putting together. So if you're trying to look for what does something like crackling or foxing look like, and am I using the term right, I think this is a great website to go to get a little bit of that information about what it might be. These days, you can also Google the term and see if you're seeing the same kind of damage and what it might be in your objects. The one thing about damage descriptors a lot of times is you'll have certain types of materials and objects that tend to have common damage types or common terms that you're going to use. So crackling is a term that you're often going to see on painting, foxing on paper. As Teresa was mentioning, acid burn, is something that you'll see a lot on paper products as well. So these are these terms that you might get as you continue to do condition assessments. You'll sort of see the same type of terms coming up again and again. And there are some damage terms that are very specific to the type of material. So red rot is a specific term for vegetable tanned leather. So if you're seeing a specific type of damage on that specific material, there are damage descriptors to use. Again, sort of increasing the consistency in what you are doing and how you are referring to different materials and different condition issues so that the next person can know what you mean and can see that and say, oh, yes, I'm seeing red rot as well. And that is either a good thing or a not good thing, depending on what was there before. Anything else?
Yeah, I just want to add to that to say you don't have to feel intimidated that there's a whole list of definitions that you have to learn. If you can't find something that fits what you're seeing, the best bet is to describe it in the most basic terms. So if you don't know if something is mildew or not, you can say, for example, a white powdery looking substance or a dark stain if you don't know what the stain is. So if you can't find the proper term to describe it, just go with the very basics of what you see, not using any kind of trade term or slang.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, again, this is where also making sure that what you're defining is helpful for the next time.
Right.
So that, again, if you're describing it basically, hopefully, the next person will know what the basic term means. And also, I think, again, things like size and, the location are going to be the important things to get down. As we've said before, and Amanda pointed out, that trying to spend 2 hours doing a perfect condition assessment is, it's going to be difficult to then get through everything in your collection. So, sort of if it's too much to sort of try to get something very specific, feel free to just, write it down, location, size, take your picture, and have that baseline of information. And that's really what's going to be helpful. Anything else on sort of specific, doing them?
I would argue that this is the kind of thing that gets easier the more you do it.
Oh yeah.
So, those of us who are museum geeks and go to other museums, this is the kind of thing that, if I see an object on an exhibit, this is the kind of thing I run through in my brain just a little bit. What do I see? What would I write down, or what would I observe about this? It's very much a practice that rewards. Like anything in working with objects, it rewards close looking, and that is absolutely a skill that you can improve. It's not like, oh, I'm just not an observant person, I guess I'll never be good at this. It's 100% something that you can practice, keep doing, and you will get better at it. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't notice the dishes are in the sink, you can improve. You can still improve and notice additional things.
So I think we're going to talk a little bit now, sort of wrap up of sort of when you've done your condition assessment, what are you going to do next with that? And Amanda's going to take about talking about exhibits and loans.
You've done. I should add that doing your condition report also assumes that you have correctly added it to the object's record and you've put it in a safe place. In that hit by a bus scenario, it's not like buried in a pile on your desk with all the other condition reports that you have attached it correctly to the object that's there and accessible for other people to use. So, what Teresa said in the beginning, one of the core times that you're going to do a condition assessment or update a condition report or assessment is when you're considering an object to go on exhibit or someone has requested it to go on loan. So, we talked in these condition reports about close observation, and now we talked a little bit about there are occasionally ones that just should not go on the exhibit. That being said, everything is a balance. With enough money, you can put almost anything on exhibit safely, carefully, keeping in mind how long to put it on. Yeah, you can, with enough money, enough expertise, and enough care, you can accomplish almost anything. That said, not all of us have those unlimited access to conservation consultants and perfect mounts and everything like that. So just keep in mind, I have an object that's in poor condition, but it is extremely important to my town, to the exhibit I'm putting together, this, that, and the other thing. So think about it. Is this something that's worth sinking a lot of money into conservation for? The answer might be yes. Is this something that's worth handling for long enough to get a really good 3D scan of it, or a really good 3D series of photographs? They do these, you can do these, and you can look online for a little bit, but you can do basically a 3D photograph, manipulatable photograph of it that with your phone, you can do it with your phone, as Teresa points out. That can be a way to display it in your exhibit instead if it's just too fragile. The one I think of a lot when I think of the balance between exhibition and condition is the Star Spangled Banner at the Smithsonian Museum of American History, right? That is in really terrible condition. But it's still on exhibit because it is a crucially important object in American history. And if you've ever been in there, they actually just sort of conserved and rehoused it in the last couple of years. If you want the details on that, Google it. It's pretty cool. They did a whole series of blog posts about it. And you can see it down there too. But they have tried to mitigate as much as possible, exhibiting something crucially important that's in poor condition. Now, I would also say that your assessment of can I exhibit this is going to be different for exhibiting it in your own facility versus sending it out on loan to someone else, because sending it out on loan to someone else, you do relinquish a certain control over it. You relinquish that ability for your own people who are most intimately familiar with it to check on it regularly, and it does have to travel. Not everything is going to travel equally well. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And it's a conversation to have with the people who are seeking to borrow something. We have those conversations weekly with other institutions, both people who are seeking to borrow from us and people that we are seeking to borrow from. And again, this is not like a value statement. It's not a personal thing. We're all trying to make the best decisions possible for the things that we have in our care. And that's how you should approach those conversations. It's not me personally that they're saying no to. We're trying to make the best decisions that we can. And sometimes that's going to mean that you don't get to do a thing you want to do if you're the one requesting a loan. And sometimes it's going to mean you have to say no to a loan. Every institution has had both of those experiences. So the last thing I want to say is if you do put something out in less than ideal condition, that's okay too, right? Teresa mentioned that quote unquote mythical museum quality label earlier. Like that's such a nebulous term. Not everything that we put out, I would argue not everything we put out should be in perfect condition, right? Because part of the object's condition is what tells your story for you, or what helps you tell the story. Things that are full of bullet holes are not in perfect condition, but that is a crucial part of their story and a part of what you're trying to say. So I think it's also totally valid to say this object lived in an attic for 100 years and is in tough condition. If you want to sometimes get ahead of questions of people going to your front desk and saying, man, that thing looks terrible. It's okay to, as I see here, let them see how the sausage is made. Talk about, what you have done to preserve, stabilize, conserve the object. That can also be great content for your audience. That gives you an opportunity to talk about your process and potentially fundraise. That is a totally valid thing to do. Ahead of it going on exhibit or while it's on exhibit, letting people know, yeah, it costs a lot of money to keep these things stable and to get them going out on exhibit. So don't be afraid to address that. Don't, feel like everything you put out has to be perfect and I'm terrified that someone's going to notice that this is not in great shape. If it's really not in great shape, but you think it's important to be out anyway, communicate that to your audience in whatever way you want to, whether it's in a label or it's in some sort of surrounding blog post or social media post or something like that. It's all about interpretation. This is my end line there.
All right, and sort of one of the last things to talk about a little bit is conservation needs and priorities. And I think we've talked about this a little bit, but Teresa's going to talk a bit more.
Yeah, so the first thing that I have up there is what has to be done. There are some problems that your object has that will damage the rest of your condition or collection. So if you have, if you spot mildew on it, you don't want to put it into storage because that will spread to other things. Stuff like termites, you don't want to put something with termites in. So ways that you can deal with that is if you have a isolation room, which I know almost nobody has, you can have a specific storage space for those objects. You can also wrap them in plastic and wait until the coldest day of winter and put them outside for a couple hours to kill all the pests. There are also several safe ways to help mitigate mildew and mold before you put them into your collection. But the best practice is always to consult a conservator. And if you're asking a basic question like that, you can pretty easily find an answer without having to hire a conservator. The second question that I put up there is determining when something is destroyed. And when something is destroyed, it's no longer of any use to the museum, and having conservation done to it is not going to bring back its usefulness. An example of that would be a shattered ball jar. You can glue it back together, but it's not going to really matter. And then the last one, which has no set answer, is what objects you want to prioritize for conservation and care. And in some places, it's objects that are deeply attached to your mission statement or where your museum is or famous people from the area. But in some cases, it's purely based on the object's need. So the flag that we showed you, for example, needs a lot of conservation, and if it doesn't get conservation, it will continue to destroy itself. So that's a conversation worth having with your colleagues and your board to establish an official policy of which objects you want to prioritize. Having a list of the top priorities is something that's very helpful and something that we do. We have a series of red stickers placed on shelves of objects of top priority. So if the building went up in flames, we would know which ones to grab. Those ones are necessarily also the ones that get top priority with conservation. If they get broken, everything gets halted so that we can fix those objects. Mm-hmm. And the last thing is preventative maintenance. How do you stop these things from happening in the first place? And the most basic thing that you can do is a regular assessment of the conditions of storage and display, and just making sure that everything stays clean and dust-free. Here, everything on exhibit gets vacuumed with a very low suction vacuum to remove dust and prevent accumulation. And everything in storage is covered in a way that it cannot get dusty. And some of the more detailed things that you can do is purchase a light meter and make sure that the light levels in your storage and exhibition spaces are below a certain level. Generally, for the most sensitive objects, you want them below 5-foot candles. And a color meter so that you can register whether things are fading. And this is like everything, a balancing act of what you can do and versus the ideal. So
there are any questions or not. A couple of follow-up notes. This recording will be available shortly on our website. So if you want to watch it again, you know other people that want to watch it, that will be available. We will also be putting together a couple of, again, handouts that we'll share with folks. And you will be getting some follow-up emails related to evaluation of the webinar. So we always appreciate when folks let us know what worked or did not work for them with this, so we can hope to improve the next one. And again, just going to promo the next one again, which is, I'm going to say the wrong date, so I'm going to look it up, March 18th, on how to write an exhibit label. And Amanda will be taking the lead on that one. So that's a really great one. If you're doing exhibits, you want to talk through really what are the specific things about writing labels that are different than writing any other thing that you're doing in your life. And so this is really great. So I'm not seeing anyone typing. So I'm going to assume folks are good. So again, our emails were in the front of this, but you can find our information on our website. And again, Vision 2020 exhibit applications, if you'd like to join us with that, we'd love to have your object or objects in there. And anything else before we go?
No, just we're excited to exhibit everything in August. So check out that website and send in your applications or pitch us your ideas. You'll also be receiving an email with a short evaluation about this webinar. So let us know what you think. That will help guide future educational stuff.
Right. Excellent. All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye. Eva, we see you typing.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome, Eva. Thank you, guys.